Now Adam probably needs less introduction because he was the kind of award of the MJF Originals, and I think your gig is on tomorrow. Is that correct?
Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Back on the wall.
So Adam is a pianist, and he can maybe talk a little bit more about himself. But he's also. Would you like to introduce your track, Adam?
Yeah. The track I've chosen is by a Japanese woman, a pianist called Aki Takase, doing a duet with Fred Frith.
That happens to be her on the screen now.
Oh yeah, that's lucky. It's a duet with Fred Frith, who some of you will know as an experimental British guitar player. In the 70s formed a band called Henry Cow, and he's been heavily involved in rock and avant-garde music. Now, in this track, they do a version of W.C. Handy's Memphis Blues, and I've kind of chosen it to talk about the relevance and meanings of early jazz for people that at first glance are very far removed from the traditions and the context in which the music first appeared. Yeah, but it raises an interesting question about how a musician now might interpret early jazz or use early jazz materials. Now, of course, elements of the very beginnings of jazz survive in the music in whatever style, and most of the gigs at this festival, you'll be able to recognise characteristics that go right the way back, but to explicitly use early forms, early styles, figures, techniques, requires a little bit of thought. Now there, Aki Takase was playing stride piano, which a lot of you will know. It's well, the left hand tends to be in an umpa style, which alternates a low note followed by a mid-register chord. And it's wonderful, but it can sound corny. A lot of people will associate that with ragtime or Dixie or music which isn't very cool. And an interesting point that Chris mentioned earlier, well, Kooj, after Kooj's prompt, about codified meanings in early jazz. What about when those codified meanings have been lost, or the code is lost in time? What does the music mean now? Now, at the turn of the last century, in bars in Harlem, stride piano would have been the coolest thing you could ever have heard. But now, maybe not so. What does it mean now? And how does a musician deal with that? Well, one thing Aki Takase did was mix up the stride and the ragtime with free elements, free jazz, and the far out stuff. And that has, well, it has a range of effects. One of them, I guess, is to highlight some kind of humour or irony, but it's not as if she's not taking the original music seriously. Actually, the review in the Penguin Guide to Jazz of that album mentioned how committed her playing is. And I was thinking, what do they mean by that, committed? How can you tell if someone's committed or not? And I think it comes down to, well, the physical energy she's expending on the keyboard and the passion in her playing. So it's certainly not a joke. And also, the mixing of early jazz elements with free jazz elements has a tradition itself. One of my favourite pianists, Jackie Bayard, was very good at switching between the two. American groups like the Art Ensemble of Chicago often went into a boogie after having just spent ages making abstract sounds. The two seem to comment on each other in an interesting way. And in mixing up free with stride, Takassi's making connections across jazz history. And it goes much further than just a joke. I saw you looking at your watch then, Kooj. Shall I?
We're getting close on.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But the first track that Chris played, the Cab Calloway track, caught my mind because I don't think anyone would argue that it was corny or uncool. It was still so cool. And I started to wonder why. Well, one thing is that it's in a minor key. It's a minor keyed stomp, like a lot of Cab Calloway's tunes were, and like a lot of Harlem stride pieces were. And that's still a very cool sound. And if you want to hear a little bit more of that sound by White European, come to Band on the Wall tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. Do you want, I mean, I'm kind of asking, to some extent, the black music, ish kind of person. Is there anything you'd like to say in relation to that?
Well, I think Serge had some very good points about the problems of jazz education in music colleges. Although I have to say that a really good college teacher will be aware of those and try to bring your individuality out. I had some very good teachers. But I'd also, I mean, there is a sense, I think still, that something might be inauthentic. Early jazz, or jazz from the mid-20th century, might still not be as authentic if it's played by a white European. I hope that idea is dying down a little bit. Certainly it used to be an issue. And the problem of authenticity is one that starts to become very complicated when you start thinking about it. For example, that Aki Takassi tune. I mean, W.C. Handy heard the tune of Memphis Blues when he was walking around town. He didn't write it. It wasn't, I mean, it's not authentic to him. Where it originated, no one knows. Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Anyway, to some degree, there's a very good book by Charlie Gerard called Jazz in Black and White, and the first chapter, he talks about the struggle he had in New York in the 70s as a white pianist, being accepted by black musicians, and he talks about the fact that really you had to be apprenticed to a good black musician in order to be taken seriously as a jazz musician. I don't know, because I wasn't in New York in the 70s, whether he's exaggerating or not. But being one step further removed from the source tradition, I think, can cause anxieties.
Interesting. Okay.